Internet to Psychologist Casual Review, and today we're going to be reviewing Lacan's very famous article, The Mirror Stage as Formative of the I Function. So this text is very important both on a philosophical level and a psychoanalytic level. Philosophical because it brings in society and alienation to society, and psychoanalytical because it gives us the premise of the identity of the subject, i.e. the person. So both come together in what is one of, I feel, Lacan's best texts, even though it's not necessarily any more simple than all his other texts, but still very interesting. So he's going to talk in this article about the mirror stage. So for you people who might not know what is the mirror stage, the mirror stage is very simply when the child from 6 months to 2 years is going to start recognizing his reflection as not being another baby, but being himself. So this can vary from individual to individual, but basically it's from the framework of 6 months up to 2 years, and it can be one moment or succession of moments. But what Lacan is really going to come down to is that fundamentally this is an essential part of humanhood. Like, this is an experience that's in a way akin to the Oedipus complex for Freud. Like, it's a very fundamental moment. And it's fundamental how so? Because for Lacan, it's going to be the birth of human intelligence. So he doesn't say that like that, but it's the idea I think that's important, is that intelligence as our understanding that we have an image that we send towards others, that we are not just receiving the images and the ideas of others onto ourselves, but we are also projecting something into the world, or showing would be a better word, something to the world. And that showing is going to be rooted in who we are, fundamentally. And the mirror stage is the first understanding that who we see is us, and us is seen by others, by a whole bunch of others. And if the first moments are a complete jubilation, meaning a full enjoyment, a happiness of the baby that understands that he can move, that the movement is there and he can enjoy the spectacle of his movement, that he can see how he is, and he can in a way have the direct feedback of the mirror on his movements. That's going to create his sense of identity and reinforce his being. Very interestingly enough, I'm going to make a little parallel here. For Winnicott, that's exactly what creates a true self. And the real self of the individual is the movement, and the fact that mother will allow for the movement. And I found it very interesting that both of those authors link the idea of an identity to the idea of spontaneous and non-hurt or non-impacted movement. That once movement is genuine, then the identity can become genuine. I found that highly interesting. Both, in a way, agree theoretically. So, coming back to Lacan's text, he's going to say that basically, at that very moment, the I is going to lead to a social ego. Very interesting that for him they are quite different. So for him, the I is the individual, but the ego is taken into society, meaning that the desire of others is going to impact the ego. And the ego is going to have to both fend off against the drives, as we know it, or as he calls them here in this text, the instincts. And the ego is going to have to try and comply to the ideal. The ideal that's going to become an ideal I. So, and the ideal I is birthed when the child understands that who he's seeing in that mirror is himself. And, fundamentally, that birth of the ideal I is going to be also the birth for the child of society. Because once he understands that he has standards he has to appeal to because he's sending something, he then has to integrate. So it's going to be at the very core the moment of fundamental alienation, that the child is going to have to conform in a way or in another to the expectations of an outside world. And the outside world is going to see it, because now he sees it, so the outside world as well. And that's that fundamental core understanding. But the alienation does not come alone. It comes with something fundamentally positive. It comes with ontological security. So what does that mean? That means that fundamentally the child is going to also feel his identity, feel reassured in who he is and what he is. It's no longer about some vagueness. It's very concrete. His image is who he is. And that fundamental who he isness, an understanding of it, is going to create within him a sense of security that will not impact his identity if there are a certain set of events like trauma, like, for example, disasters, etc., etc., etc. So fundamentally it will create some baseline of experience that is fundamentally positive. For Lacan, the child is going to go from the inner world to a home world. I hope I'm saying this right. Meaning that the child is going to go from a set of experiences that are purely internal and subjective, i.e. the relationship with the breast, relationship with his mother, projection, projective identification, I'm going to get there, and so on and so forth. And he's going to now realize, he's going to enter the world, meaning he's going to realize there's a whole outside world that sees him, and he has to be conscious of his own image that now he knows about, and now he's conscious of. So we're going to go from a point of jubilation to a point, in a way, of ideal, because there's always going to be a gap between the reflection, which presents an instantaneousness of the identity, and what the child fundamentally, at its core, can do. So there's going to be always a gap between the image and the possibility. That gap is for Lacan when we go through from insufficientness to anticipation, meaning that in a way, and this is how I interpret it, hope starts there. Fundamentally, you're hoping that you're going to be able to do the movement that's going to impact the reflection. You're going from a state where you're powerless to a state where you might be powerful or might be able to. And that ability is fundamentally what's going to create the hope. I am able and I hope the things will change because I can make them change. At least that's how I read the text, right? So fundamentally, it's going to create a whole bunch of phenomena going through an ideal sense of self, intelligence of one's own image and how he presents it. It's going to create alienation because now that you see your image, you know how dependent you are also upon others seeing it. And we're going to go from a being that thinks his inner world is all the world, inner world, to a being that understands that there is a world and perhaps afterwards a mid-world, and fundamentally the system itself. So here we have something very interesting, and perhaps even the basis of sociology starts with the mirror stage. And I found that very, very interesting, that our whole system starts with that moment where you realize that other people see you as you see yourself in the mirror. It's very, very interesting also to see that for Lacan, this whole process leads to the formation of the ego, as the I is not really the ego, or at least not quite that. That the I is something of a sensory inner process, whereas the ego seems to be more ready, more detached, and more into the social world. But he says that in, for example, the fact of having paranoia, the problem is that they go from an I to a social I, but they never really fundamentally develop strong ego that can push back against certain ideals that have insinuated themselves within the individual. So here I'm going a bit on a tangent because he only says that like in a word or in a short sentence, but I found it very interesting, so I wanted to develop it. But the fundamental core idea is that that moment is game-changing for the infant. That moment is going to connect both the body and the mind for the child, but also gonna make the child realize how other people see him. It's no longer just about I and mother, but it's about I, mother, and myself, the image of myself. And that's very interesting because, of course, those years, 6 months to 2 years, people forget, like you don't really remember. But when you see children, it's true that they're incredibly amazed and happy. And when they understand that it's them, they're just so happy and so enthusiastic about it because they realize it and they're fundamentally enjoying the moment of realization. So I think he nailed something of an ideal that is inseminated at that moment that's so fundamental that it's gonna create a pathway for everything else. And he also ends the article in a very interesting manner by saying that in a way psychoanalysis can help people by making them understand who they are, but that who they are, tu es cela, you're that, is only the beginning of the process. That you are that is the first step to a deeper understanding, and perhaps even at certain points trying to re-evaluate the inner world, as he stated it, even though he doesn't go as far as that. But he says that we can't choose for the patient, but if he wants to work on that, that's something that's doable. Not necessarily the inner world, but trying to understand at the core who we are and not you are this, which is the you are this that's created by the mirror and this mirror stage. Also, before I end this video, I wanted to talk about the psychotic experience, because fundamentally he doesn't really talk about it, or very briefly, but fundamentally it's quite different, because for psychotics the mirror stage is not going to give them ontological security as it's going to give neurotic people, meaning that for neurotic people there's going to be a sense of security because they're going to understand who they are. It's going to give them alienation, but a sense of identity. They're this, and they understand they're this. But psychotic is not, and body anxiety is like liquefaction, meaning the fear that the body might turn into water or leaking out, and the fact that they might feel that their body parts are not theirs, like, or the fear that the body part might fall off, like dismemberment anxiety. Well, for Lacan, those anxieties go back to a mirror stage that's not quite unified, that doesn't give this sense of ontological security which it gives the neurotics. It does not, and the psychotics, it doesn't really match, meaning that they're not really into the ideal I in a social way, but in the ideal I in a personal way, idiosyncratic way, that it's not necessarily shared by society. It might be superimposed, but it's not shared, meaning that it's in their very specific way. Meaning that, for example, they can have states of delusion where they're gonna say that they're the most important person, but also do the most unimportant stuff, and it's not gonna be for them a problem because they're not into that aspect of society as neurotics are. That doesn't mean that they don't understand society, but that means that at the core of the delusions, society does not necessarily have the weight that neurotics have during just normal day life, nor do they have in their daily lives, because psychotics are, of course, people that can understand fundamentally the difference that society has towards them. But unfortunately, when there's delusions, that criticism becomes nigh impossible, at least for most of them. Of course, there's a lot of nuance to be had in the discourse I've just said, but it's to give you the fundamental core ideas. So I hope you found this video interesting, and if you have any questions or feel that I haven't quite landed on certain topics, or you just want to discuss anything, please feel free to do so in the comments. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.